great to be with all of you and welcome. First and foremost, I hope that you are well and taking some time for self-care and looking forward to a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season. For those of you who might be new to Inspire and have not met me yet, I just want to say hello and welcome. We at Inspire are a bit of a secret weapon to both CHROs and CEOs for everything on their HR agenda. We typically help in one of three ways. We provide interim talent that parachutes in should an organization have an interim need if someone's out on leave or a role that's been open too darn long. Two, we help by coming in and doing work with lean teams to do strategic projects from assessment to delivery. And three, we train and coach, whether it's for employees, for leaders, or upskilling HR teams. So we're a team of 37 experts across the country, and we parachute into both Fortune 500 and startups alike, and we are growing. So if you have anyone in your network that's looking for a new opportunity to join an inclusive team of experts and work flexibly, please shoot me a note. So we find ourselves here in November. I think we're on month 19 of this pandemic. And I want to take us back for a moment to August. There was a lot going on in the news. The US had withdrawn from Afghanistan. There was so much in the press about the ongoing climate crisis. COVID, clearly this thing called Delta was a beast, and infrastructure legislation, the list goes on. But something else kind of major happened for HR and diversity leaders here in August too, that got a touch buried in the business cycle, which was that NASDAQ had a rule that finally went into effect, which requires all 3,000 of the companies that are traded to include on their board at least one female and one person from a historically underrepresented community. And I just had this moment where it was buried, and I thought, we need to make time for this before we wind down in 21. And that's what we're discussing today. If DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, wasn't on every HR and business leader's radar before that most ruling of NASDAQ, what I want to just draw light to is that it had been a thing that was gaining focus. There was more pressure being put on organizations, whether it's Goldman Sachs saying that they need more diversity at organizations that they were investing in, all the legislation out of California that came after the rise of the Me Too movement, et cetera. But there was this constant increasing pressure. But it's challenging in many ways. Organizations are finding we are shifting centuries of status quo systems and networks that have been built around this human fundamental DNA thing where we as humans search for sameness. And we're currently finding ourselves working with multiple clients in the entertainment and industry, finance sector that are scaling and looking to fill these top roles, whether it's a COO, a CFO, et cetera. And we're finding in day-to-day, they need some guidance to fill these roles, build diverse pipelines with beautifully qualified candidates, as well as create a feeling of inclusion on their board or on leadership teams when those folks join. So we want to very much expand the dialogue and talk about that today. So for our final session of 21 in our series of redesigning the future of work, we wanted to focus on diversity on the board and senior leadership levels. And we've assembled an all-star panel to tackle this very issue and offer their insights. Felicia is with us, the Chief People Officer at LifeStance Health, previously with TPG Capital. Fiona Tang, the co-founder and director of partnerships at Him for Her. Colleen Loria as well, who's an expert with Inspire, who specializes in senior HR and global leadership. The three of you, thank you so much for being here. And you each have such unique and impressive backgrounds. I'd love if you could just take a moment and give us each a quick bit about your background. So Fiona, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so excited to be in this important discussion. As Jimmy said, I'm the co-founder of Him for Her, where we focus on we're a social impact venture focused on corporate board diversity. We've learned a lot through this, so excited to share what we have.
Fantastic, thank you. And Felicia, and happy birthday. I believe you celebrated a birthday yesterday. Felicia.
Oh, happy happy birthday, Fiona. We
Thank
kept it a
you.
secret, but Jamie unearthed it. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Felicia Gorsica. I'm the Chief People Officer for LifeStance Health. LifeStance is in the business of mental health. We employ more than 4,000 psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists around the country. And at LifeStance Health, we say we make lives better. So it's really a privilege to support the people that are helping to solve the mental health crisis in our country, one patient at a time. My immediately prior, as you mentioned, I was with TPG, which is where Fiona and I crossed paths, did some wonderful work there with him for her, and gratefully part of a team that put 100 women on TPG portfolio company boards during the time that I was there. And it was in my prior life in HR leadership that I first met Jamie through a mutual friend. And I reflect back on that time of like the importance of asking for help. And if you ask your network for help, they will deliver and introduce you to new and fantastic people like Jamie. So it's a privilege to be here and part of this dialogue. Thank you.
Great to have you. And my gosh, 100 people. I mean, that is quite a stat. On boards. Colleen.
Hi, Jamie, Fiona, Felicia, good to be here. As Jamie said, I'm a senior HR leadership expert with Inspire HR. I specialize in workforce planning, high touch employee experiences, and just encouraging our leadership teams to infuse diversity and inclusion in every aspect of the business. I'm also really proud to be on the board of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, the New York City chapter. NAMI provides free support services, education and advocacy to individuals living with mental illness. We are also one of the only nonprofits in the New York area providing support to families of individuals, of adults specifically living with mental illness. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, thrilled. This, like I said, this is the star-studded group. So I am so excited to kick it off with with all the questions. But as we think about these regulatory forces, and that very much being the driving force behind diversifying boards. I love, we touch on this all the time working with our DEIB clients and how it impacts their leadership team. I always try to start with our clients with the why, right? What is the business case? What is the human case behind this? And it goes way beyond regulatory requirements. So let's go ahead and set the table and start there. I'd love to hear from each of you, maybe one or two reasons that you would encourage business leaders to diversify their boards and executive teams beyond the regulations. Felicia, can you kick it off?
Yeah, delighted to. Great question. So I think there are a couple of things that come to mind for me and the experiences that I've had. One of them is that I was really fortunate several years ago to see the late Dr. Catherine Phillips speak about her work and her research. I was a senior professor at Columbia, and her research essentially demonstrated time and time again, what we have seen prove out in all of these different, business cases and studies about why do diverse teams have higher performing businesses, right? You see that in publicly traded companies, businesses that have more diverse boards and leaders trade at a premium to their peer group. There's McKinsey studies, there are just masses of reports that demonstrate that diverse teams make better decisions and have better business outcomes. Mm-hmm. But what Dr. Phillips' research showed is that the reason for that is because you have to work harder with people who are not like you to solve for problems, right? When you're in a homogenous group, it's like, oh, I was thinking the same thing. That's so great. And you whiz through it and it's easy and it feels good and you get to the decision and hurrah, you're back to your day. Well, when you're working with people that are different from you, you're like, I don't know. I don't understand your perspective. You have to work harder. You have to explore such a broader range of considerations and options. And the result of that is through all of these different filters and exploring different things, you have a richer dialogue, truly enriched. And the result of that are these better decisions, more well-founded, more far-reaching. And so that is one thing I think that is just, you have to know that being on a diverse team is hard. It's going to feel more difficult, and you have to be committed that I'm participating in this, knowing that it's hard because I want to have a better outcome for my team, for my business unit, for my company, so on and so forth. So I think that's one thing, is just, the case for it is so clear, because that's what we come to work to do, is to achieve the best performance that we can. And having a diverse team is an attribute of that. The second thing, which I know my colleagues here will talk about, is people just simply expect engagement in social issues. I am old enough to have, grown up in the workforce in a time when leadership was just about like what's going on in the company. And that time has passed. People want to look up and see that their company, their leadership team is engaged, is aware of social issues, is engaged in social issues, is speaking on social issues. And I think we can all have different points of view on, how appropriate that is or isn't in the workplace. But the fact is that people expect it. So I think that that's another reason is, to be competitive in today's labor market, you have to acknowledge what's important to people, and demonstrate that. And that doesn't mean taking a particular side on the social issue, but it means creating an awareness and a forum for people to see that leadership is aware, they care, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is very much a social issue that people expect their employer to be engaged in and demonstrating action on.
Such a good point. It's just true. That is the future of work. I really think that I think personally that the future is really weaving more of that DEIB lens into the entire employee life cycle and experience and engagement. So truly to be modern is such a great business reason. Colleen, thoughts from you?
Yeah, there are, all of my clients today, when I ask them what their number one challenge is, it's talent attraction and talent retention, right? We are in the midst of the great talent war, the great resignation, whatever we're calling it these days. So, when I think about reasons why it's important for a business to do this, it cuts right to the bottom line, right? So in terms of attracting talent, employees want to work in organizations where they believe they can succeed. How do they know they can succeed? When they can see themselves in your board and in your senior leadership team, right? So ensuring you've got a diverse mix of talent on your board will give you a leg up in the talent war. It's very attractive to the candidate base. And then when it comes to retaining your employees, much like what Felicia was saying, employees have a very low tolerance today for companies who are talking about their commitment to diversity and inclusion, but are not following it through with actions. So I can name 5 instances off the top of my head this year of regrettable employee resignations that were the result of companies not following through on their so-called commitments to DEIB. So, I mean, this hits your bottom line, right? In terms of transition time, in terms of recruitment time, training, loss of intellectual capital, the impact to the culture, the reverberating effects of it go really deep within the organization. So those are 2 of the top priorities for me when I'm talking to executives.
It really impacts the employer brand. So those are such good points. Fiona, thoughts from you?
Yeah, and really great question. We could probably spend the whole hour just talking about this.
Yes.
But a little bit of what both Felicia and Colleen said, but in a different direction, is that we've seen that operating executives who go out and seek board roles and join boards, and the savviest CEOs who encourage their management team to go out and get that board experience is that it actually benefits the companies that they operate within. They get more insight, strategy. They can see that pattern across different industries potentially. So all of that just ends up benefiting the business. And then if you think about the executive, they get that inherent additional learning, development. And we've got a lot of CEOs within our network who have very just thoughtfully advocated for their closest executives, mentees to join boards because of that. So we just see a lot of just cyclical benefits for.
Absolutely. It's I want to touch, I have so many questions for y'all, but the next thing on my mind is about Fiona. It's a question for you. And I love the work that you do through Him for Her. And we know that you really have your finger on the pulse of board diversity. Could you tell us a little bit more about the findings you've identified from your annual survey that you did with Crunchbase? I was fascinated by this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start by telling you why we did this study. And it's an annual study. We've done 2 years now, which, can now solidly say that it's annual. We're going to be releasing like deep in the third one. And when we came into the space, which, we've been working on Him for Her for 3 years and looked at all the metrics that were out there, and everything referenced was about public companies, which, is an important, very visible slice of the business world. But many of us have worked within very influential, very high growth companies that have a lot of impact. And we were just finding that there wasn't enough data. And because our backgrounds of the founding team are all from tech companies, tech background operators,
Yes.
We know inherently that you don't change what you don't measure, or you can't change what you don't measure. So we really felt like we had to kick this off. Like there had to be more clarity around the progress we were going to be making. So we learned a few things in kicking off the study, in looking at specifically private companies. And given how vast it is, we took a slice. So we looked at the most heavily venture-backed companies. In the first year, we looked at 200, and the second year we had 349. So within this subset, we found that, the first year, 60% didn't have a single woman on board. And then in the second year, 49% did. So we're headed in the right direction. But a couple of other things we found that really informed not just our goals, but how we were approaching, the whole landscape. And, women held 11% of the board seats. And then within that, 3% were women of color. So within all of just what we're looking at with the data, the story told us that, we really had to make an impact on the independent seats where women were holding most of those seats. And, I think that what struck me was that even in the independent seat, most of those seats were held by men. Because women were only holding 1 in 5 seats. So I think that showed us that there was plenty of work to do, right?
Plenty.
And that the private company growth and the influence we can be making across that was something that we can then, have ripple effects. I think the important thing there is also that we're really trying to ask companies to think about adding independence earlier in their life cycles before they hit this stage. And I'm proud to say that we've been able to work with a lot of seed and Series A companies where, I'm thinking about the life cycle of the benefits that they're going to be getting from having that strategic direction from, a diverse board.
From go. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I found most interesting about the study that we did is just the going beyond the only member of diversity on the board, and really trying to go beyond that so that there is strength in that diversity as well.
I think that's such an important point that we see reflected in the voice and the experience of the women and, people of color that are the first diverse member of the board. And one person I remember said it really kind of just bluntly, but eloquently. She said, when you are the first woman on the board, it's like they expect you to represent all of womankind. And I mean, none of us can, right? We all have different lived experiences, backgrounds, influences, other, demographic and socioeconomic things that make up, kind of who we are. And it was just super interesting to hear from that perspective. But you can just sort of see it, how many times have you been in the room and a topic comes up that seems kind of gender related, and it's like the whole room,
Right.
all goes to one person.
Can you, right?
It's
Can you
like
speak for
how,
50, right? Can you
yes, like
speak for
how can I
50%?
be thoughtful on behalf of all womankind in this moment?
Right.
Which doesn't make sense, of course, right? But then she said, but then when there are two, it's like you're colluding, and you actually have to be kind of intentional to, like, don't sit next to each other at the table, don't have your meals together. Like, you have to be really intentional about, splitting up, if you will. But then when there are three people that are different from everyone else, then you're just like everyone else. And there is a lot of, there's the 30% coalition. I mean, there is a lot of math around this 30% number. And we see that in the California legislation and the targets that publicly traded California companies need to get to, between the combination of people of diverse by gender, race, ethnicity, orientation. So I think that it was kind of a funny anecdote, but it's true. And I think it just brings to life, the concept of tokenism and what that really means, and what you're asking someone to do when you're expecting them to speak on behalf of an entire gender, race, ethnicity, or orientation.
Right. Like, could you speak for half the planet, please, Felicia?
Right.
I think that it,
I would try, but that is not representation.
Oh, there's just such an intersectionality that's missing when we look at it like that, but that's good. I'm always looking for takeaways for folks who join us to take, and 3 is the magic number for this moment. So given the human propensity for sameness, what we call like me bias, how can business leaders, promote that climate once they've recruited people that engage everyone on the board, especially women, especially people from historically underrepresented communities? Felicia, I don't know if you have any thoughts to kick that off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key ingredient here is building a culture, whether it is at your within your board, your leadership team, and broadly within your organization, that is comfortable with a level of conflict, right? That can see that conflict can be healthy. Because remember again, like, the objective of diversity is that you have different opinions and different perspectives that people are bringing to bear. And so, because by definition those are different, that means that they're going to be in conflict with each other, and creating a culture which supports that. Like, this is a good discussion, rather than an environment where people feel like that conflict, is personal, or they internalize it, or it creates drama in the workplace. And so, I always like to say to people, mistakes are the price we pay for wisdom. Right. And so the meaning behind that is that you need to fail and learn. And, being, having your point of view in the discussion not be the prevailing point of view, that's not a failure. That's a contribution to a discussion that ultimately led to a different outcome.
Yes.
And so all of these little micro instances of conflict, and getting people comfortable with that in a way that doesn't become a personality issue is super important, because that's the only way that someone who is representing a distinctive or diverse voice at the table is going to feel comfortable contributing, is that they feel like, we're going to get into a dialogue. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but that's a safe space for me to be. Yeah. And then everybody learns something from the dialogue. So my experience is that getting people comfortable with conflict in a way they can see that it's healthy, and leads to a better outcome, It's a really key ingredient, and each one of us can affect that just on the team that we are on in our day to day. Just like every day, find one way to practice that and get better at it.
Absolutely. Colleen, I'd love to hear from you as well. I know you're so involved in the NAMI chapter here in Manhattan.
Yeah, I just have to say, Felicia, I love that, the thought of helping everyone become comfortable with that culture of conflict, because it's just so antithetical to what we're used to, how we're used to developing our leaders from, 15 years ago. But using one point of your example, I think, and referring to Inspire's talent strategy here, we encourage our leaders to take on positive action for underrepresented groups, right? So that means making room for someone at the table or on the Zoom call if you see them not participating, right? Making room for them to participate. And if they are particularly reticent, approaching them after the meeting and asking, was there something that I could have done differently to make you more comfortable to participate in this meeting? Was there a specific reason why you were holding back? You'd be really surprised what you find out when you actually ask those questions. And that does take a level of strength to approach those individuals to say, this is what I noticed. Tell me what I can do to help you here. I think the other thing I would say is acknowledging the unique challenges that your board members who are, from different communities are experiencing, whether it's, if they're the only person of color on a board or the only person with a disability on the board, trying to see decisions, actions, going through the decision-making process through their lens, I think is really important to helping them feel a level of comfort with participating in that particular community. And, if you're struggling to understand, listen, we're all learning every day. So there are tons of resources out there, not the least of which is talking to folks and, asking them about their personal experiences.
Absolutely. There is so much more beneath that. There's this wonderful graphic of, like the glacier, like what we see is that very tippy top out of the ocean. But when you ask folks about the different dimensions of their life, you learn so much more that's beneath the waterline. We're working with several clients right now who are recruiting for these top spots on their leadership team. And what we've realized is that step one is really around a bit of the sourcing strategy. We can absolutely go through, making connections with more diverse networks, looking through the whole talent acquisition process, reimagining it, reducing bias through that whole hiring process and always through the questions that are asked. But sourcing tends to be the thing that folks, I think, get a little bit stuck on because it can feel so onerous. So I'd love to share some tactics. We're always looking for tactics in these sessions. What are tactics that business leaders can use to expand their personal network, their organization's network, in order to diversify the candidate pool for board and senior leadership roles? Colleen, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah. I think it all starts with the position. When you're crafting the job position or the board position, I encourage our leaders to think broadly about who will be successful in the role. Try to avoid taking a cookie cutter approach where, okay, we need a pharmaceutical executive and this is what that person looks like. So what you want to do when you're writing that description is be very specific about the key performance metrics. What do you need to be accomplished? When does it need to be accomplished? How do you expect that person to perform? But be flexible about experience, background, industry. There are many paths to success. And I think if you can be specific about what you're trying to accomplish while being open about who you're willing to interview for that role, it will naturally lead you to a more diverse slate of candidates. And, Jamie, I'll add one other thing. I think look in different places, right? Go outside of your network. You mentioned seek out niche platforms for job seekers and for board member recruitment. Work with partners like Him for Her, or Board Assist for nonprofit, and also like ask your competitors, ask your employees, ask your vendors, where are you finding talent? You'd be surprised how much sharing everyone is willing to do. There's a wealth of information out there if you just ask the question.
Especially during these times, I feel like the one thing that the pandemic has done is it's put us all in these Brady Bunch boxes. They're all, the same size, and it's a bit of a level playing field. And I do see more generosity in making those introductions, certainly. Felicia, Fiona, thoughts from you as well?
Yeah, I'll add a couple, and then I think Fiona has such a unique perspective, having been like at the top of the funnel on so many board opportunities. I mean, kind of building on what Colleen talked about, especially at the board level and executive too, but let's just talk about governance for a minute. It is just a commonly held best practice that you should have a board matrix. And you put all your board members down one side, and at the top of it, you have their experience. They have public company, private company, an investor, an operator, a GM. They have technology expertise, digital marketing expertise, so on and so forth. And then, of course, you have the demographics. Is this person diverse by race, ethnicity? At a board level, you also can add age. And that's acceptable in governance, is to disclose age and be specific about that. So then you have this matrix of what your board is today. And then you're looking at what are the strategic priorities for the business, and kind of overlay that to say, what is not here, right? What is it that we're going to be pursuing as a business strategically that is not represented here? And that could be, we need global regulatory experience. That could be, we need tech-enabled services experience. You know what I mean? It could be something functional or industrial. But then you look at the other attributes that are not there. And if you don't have representation by gender, race, ethnicity, or orientation, then that's how you build your spec. And you are as intentional about searching for the demographic qualifications as you are about searching for the industry or the functional qualifications. It's all one spec. And that, I think, was the unlock, in my experience at TPG, is because it wasn't like, bring me your women. It was like, we're looking for an expert in this area, and we're going to go find the best candidates that are female executives that have that experience. And that's just your pool. And that's it. And the only caveat I'll say to that is, having this disciplined selection process on the criteria is super important, but always leave yourself open to someone that you trust saying, yeah, but you've got to meet this person. They're really special. So like Fiona would kind of have our wish list of what we want. And then she or Jocelyn would be like, but you've got to meet this person. And you have to leave yourself open to that, because how many of us have been, had like the aha candidate or surprised about something. And so I do think that that's really important when you're advising a board or your executive team or any other team, is don't be so rigid on the criteria that you don't leave yourself open to opportunity just for great talent. So I think that's a little bit of, because there were definitely times I felt like we had a great spec and the candidate mostly had the criteria, but maybe they were a little left of center. But I'm like, but no, this person is just such an incredible thinker. Their network is really expansive, or there was just something about them that was special. And you've got to be willing to kind of pound the table and have people that let people that that like, I trust you. To tell me when I'm missing a great candidate because I'm being overly myopic about the criteria.
And if they have the X factor, we need to have the conversation with them.
Yeah.
Speaking of X factor, Fiona, you see this all at the top of the funnel. Wisdom from you.
Yeah, I have so much reaction to this because it is, something I'm passionate about, but then also just a day-to-day for us. So I think the one starting point is the being thoughtful and mindful and intentional about the whole process is super important to Colleen and Felicia's point. I think it's also just ensuring that you're not baking in inherent bias into the spec as well by saying, I'm only going to look at CFOs. I'm only going to look at CEOs. And I want a woman, and she needs to be a woman of color, and, because then it just makes it so that you do, on the one hand, get a much smaller candidate pool. And then on the other, I think it adds that rigidity that makes it so that you might go into the process not being open to the compelling candidates. And I've had a number of times where I've worked with a CEO and they've listed out all of the things that they want to see in this candidate. And then to Felicia's point, adding in like people who are like really compelling for this particular reason, because I know this about their business that they headed in the next 5 years, right? And I think that that's also something to be mindful of is thinking about term limits and what that might look like so that there is an intentional board refresh process in that. Because we like to say that the average board service term is longer than most US marriages. And with that in mind, yes, you want to be mindful, but also you should think about the fact that your board will evolve with your business, especially if you're in high growth mode. Your board members, when you're at seed stage, should look very different and have different competencies and skill sets and things that they bring to you than when you're at a Series D or beyond.
I just want to add one more thing to that, and you're right. This is like the topic we could spend so much time on, which is another thing that I think is we're seeing transition now in governance in particular is just the age range. And I thought what Fiona said about CFOs, right? So like always for your audit committee, you need someone who has either been a CFO or an audit partner. Like there are certain things that are like, okay, I need a qualified financial expert here, right? And then, but there's a different way to think about that, QFE role. And meaning the qualifications are what they are, but it doesn't mean that a person has to have sat in a public company CFO role to be a QFE, depending on what the company's context is. And I think there are a lot of situations like that. If you're just looking for a general independent board member, one thing I saw some companies really embrace was this idea that their customers are really young. And like looking at the buying power of their customer group and then wanting that voice to be represented on the board. And so we saw a lot more board members come in that were in their 30s. And in the old days, you never would have seen this, right? Unless it was the founder of the company. I mean, board members just sort of by definition had to be 50 or older, because they had not, amassed the executive experience to prepare them for governance until that point. Whereas now we think about governance in a different way, which is like, whose voice do we need at the table? And everyone here knows that depending on our age, we use our phone in different ways. Okay, so if we are an older generation, we use our phone to talk on it. And if we are a younger generation, our phone is barely a communication device other than just for texting. It's really for viewing videos, participating in social, and just this simple act of how consumer and individual behavior is different needs to be represented. So it's just like one example of, if board service lasts longer than marriage, well, guess what? Most people meet their partner online now. So what, again, like how is society different in a way that we need representation for these changes, the behavioral economics of who our customer, who our workforce is. And so that may mean that you have a different profile that you're searching for that is a younger demographic than, you or your board might have been thinking you need.
It's so interesting. And I have a 16-year-old daughter, and she and her friends all sorted out who they're going to the junior prom with via text. So it also makes me think about how during this time of so much information swirling, trust and relationships are everything. It's really a luxury item. So to think that those trusted relationships are now also happening on Gen Y board candidates' phones to build all those relationships, romantic or otherwise, right? It's really about, that's where those relationships happen. I want to jump to a poll because we'd very much love to get input from the folks that are with us. So the poll that's about to launch, I'm just so curious, did all these new rules that are in town, right? Did they impact things at your company? So did the NASDAQ ruling, the Goldman Sachs policy, California legislation requiring, that diversity on boards, did it affect your company's approach to recruiting? We're just so curious to see if that's a thing that folks are very much experiencing in their organizations. We have about 15 minutes left to the discussion. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We have a bunch of questions that were sent in advance as well. And well, 86% of folks have said no, that all the rules have not impacted the company's approach to recruiting. Interesting. Okay. So moving on, I'm so curious. There's again such a wealth of experience among this fabulous group. I'm curious about any examples or stories that you can point to that shows that power of representation at a leadership level. So perhaps someone who offered a diverse point of view based on lived or professional experience that shaped the decision making in a positive way. We're always looking for those examples, the ROI on these choices. So any examples or stories? Fiona, can we start with you because you have that visibility into so many companies?
Yes, and the story I'll share is actually from one of our advisors, Stacey Brown-Philpott, who was formerly CEO of TaskRabbit, who now is on the board of Noom, StockX, and has been on the board of HP and Nordstrom. And so her story comes from her time at Nordstrom, where at the time, I believe Nordstrom, which is a 100-year-old brand and an institution in retail and an amazing company, they were at about a third of their sales online. And she just asked a question because from everything we've heard about the most valuable board members in the boardroom, they ask great questions, and it's the how of delivering that, inspiring thinking. And she just said, what happens when more than 50% of your business is online? Then what, right? And because of her tech background and experience, she just inspired the team to think bigger about what the future looks like. And so now I believe they're at over 55% online. And they now have a really robust, extensive tech team to support that effort. Just that point of inspiration was something that stayed with me.
Absolutely. I love that. I love how you said it's really about just also the framing of the question and being really curious, and everyone brings that various lived or professional experience to ask those exact questions to help people think about what the future of the organization looks like. Colleen, Felicia, any other examples or stories that you might want to share?
Yeah, I had an interesting experience within our board earlier this year. We were having a board meeting, and we do have one of our board members is a person living with serious mental illness. And we were having this discussion amongst the board members, and several of my colleagues, probably myself included, weren't using the most up-to-date language. And this colleague who is living with mental illness stopped the conversation and took that as, a teaching opportunity to talk to us about people first language. And it was just really impactful because of how she did it. She was very empathetic in her approach, and it opened up, we've been talking a lot about trust, right? So it opened up the lines of communication and trust to enable us all to be curious about the impact of language. It also really stopped me in my tracks in terms of understanding the impact of this person's daily lived experience when language is not used well. So it was a very impactful moment. It enabled us to bring in a consultant to do more training with the board on the use of person first language and, how it impacts stigma for people living with mental illness. So it really was a very impactful moment for the board. What one of the quotes that the trainer brought into the training session that I thought would be interesting for the team here is a Mark Twain quote. And it's the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. And I thought that was just a very, illustrative quote.
It's really, and how beautiful that that board member had that sense of belonging and safety and trust that they could speak their truth. And then here it just opened up the whole board's aperture about the use of language.
The bravery,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that it's really, it takes courage for someone to share what is on their heart in a business context sometimes. And I also think that there is a way that a person approaches it, right? In this case, Colleen, right, your fellow board member was seeking for people to understand the environment they were creating, the feelings, that she was having. She was seeking to help people understand, to educate, to learn, to be knowing. I also think that there are different situations we've all been part of when, that intention might not be there. The intention instead is to make people uncomfortable, right? And I know I'm the one who said earlier, let's get people comfortable with conflict. And I stand by that. I also think that there is being courageous and what your intention is. And I certainly have seen people kind of take that to a point where it's like, well, I felt pain and I have been discriminated against. So now you need to feel that pain. You need to, put the rocks in your shoes that I had in mine. And it is really challenging for people. It's kind of contrary to change management one-on-one, which is how you get people on board with transformational change, is to first get their trust, right? Establish a safe space for you to communicate to them. This is the situation, this is the reason for the change. This is how I feel about it. This is how it affects you. This is your role. All of those things need to take place. And I think we just need to really, coach and collaborate with our colleagues to make sure that we're not supporting these types of dialogues where someone just sort of comes in and is really just trying to make other people uncomfortable. Because what happens is then, they'll just withdraw. I don't want to be, made to feel bad for who I am, by way of birth. Just like I don't want anyone else to feel bad for who they are by way of birth. So let's create that safe space for people to learn from each other rather than, confront each other. That you can't possibly understand. Well, no, I can't understand if you assume that I don't want to. And so there's this, I do think that we're struggling through this time where we want people to speak their truth. And we need people to do that in an environment that encourages education and learning and not creating this emotional reaction, which is defensiveness, because we cannot create transformational change without, people feeling, safe to be vulnerable, because that's the only way that we can learn and start to change together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we've learned just through our work with so many clients in this space is that when humans feel that sense of shame, they shut down, and then very much the learning cannot happen. We have a lot of questions that we want to do a quick Q&A on. So before we go to that, I have a question for all of you, which is around what are you as humans doing for self-care during this time business leaders, HR have really been at the front of trying to steady their organizations. And what we're trying to really do in the entire Inspire community is remind folks to very much take care of themselves as well so that they can fill their well and show up for others. So in the spirit of that, I'd love to hear anything that you all are doing to keep it real during this time. Colleen, what are you doing?
Jamie, I think you know I have committed myself to physical activity. I have discovered that I love deadlifting and jump squats and things that I would never, ever have known had it not been for the pandemic and being grounded. I couldn't go anywhere. And I was like, well, all right, I'm going to get a personal trainer and we're going to work this out. And so it's given me oodles of energy and, just a different level of pride when I walk away from the gym and I go, I just deadlifted 115 pounds. This is amazing.
Yeah.
That's what's been keeping me going.
Oh, I love it. Most impressive. Most impressive. Fiona, what about you?
This is a great question. And I feel like, I like to say that when we're busy at Him for Her, it's good for the ecosystem, but we're still a pretty lean team of 6 right now. And I am hiring, by the way, given that this is the group. To maybe
Yeah. Put it out there. Definitely.
Yeah. But I think this past year, I've really tried to carve out space and time for me to nurture my hobbies. And I like to make things. So I took up sewing again and made my husband a shirt. So yeah, just really trying to spend more time on things like that kind of bake in some decision making and in a time when I can't plan for trips and things of that sort.
Yes.
I can now plan for projects, which kind of feeds that energy a little bit.
Yeah.
There was no replacement for
I love it. It's so old, right? There's no replacement for travel, my friend, but that is so old school. It's like very flashback to like home ec class in 7th grade, right? Yeah. But that idea of sewing and just, there's something very grounding about that for sure. Yeah. And Felicia, what about you?
Yeah, well, you reminded me, Fiona, that I have 3 kids, but my middle one, my son, he took up knitting. I was so excited. I thought we were gonna get, like hats for the winter or whatever, and it was soon replaced with some other hobby. But you just reminded me, I need to re-inspire his knitting career. So for me, there was a time, I think it was probably summer of 2020, so like 6 months into the pandemic, that I had to shut off the news. It was so negative. As a business leader, need to be informed, but it was really affecting my psyche in a negative way. So I shut off the news, but I turned on books of fiction. And I think in the back half of that year, I read like 20 books. Which is really, really hard to find the time to read for pleasure. But it was it changed my whole perspective because I could dive into these characters, people who were not like me, right? Like just to really be in a different world. And it was great self-care for me. It was very calming for my spirit. It satisfied my intellectual curiosity. It brought me into different times and experiences in a way that was super important. So I've kept that up, but also made it like a social thing where I will send books that I read to friends and they'll send them to me. So like very, kind of an old fashioned, book exchange. Yeah. We don't like get together and talk about it like book club. But it created a really great experience and one that I could share with other people too.
I love it. Oh my gosh, y'all are giving this community. I just got a text from someone about an idea that was brought up. You are giving people lots of great things to think about. Thank you. So in just the 2 minutes we have remaining, I just wanted to go quickly to some questions that were sent to us. What metrics do you track and report for DEIB at a board, C-suite, company level? Anyone have thoughts on that? This is like the speed round. So any quick answers on that?
Sorry, I was reading the chat. What was the question?
Metrics. So are there metrics that you track and report for DEIB at a board, C-suite, company level?
All the metrics. Yeah, all the metrics.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
ahead, Colleen. She's
I mean,
gonna.
the theme that we would do internally with a leadership team, we do on the board level as well.
Okay. Recruiting, retention, all the things. Okay, great. How can boards and C-suite best incorporate diverse points of view from other members of the team not in leadership positions when making company decisions?
Ask, create forums for open feedback, and really, my experience is like, go to the pain, the things that you most
Mhm.
immediately are like, make you recoil, like go to those things. And I do want to address the chat, because I'm worried if people
Please.
felt like what I was saying, was to like have this nice peaceful dialogue around things. That's not the point. The point is for people to feel comfortable sharing, and even if what they have to share is uncomfortable and makes
Sure.
people uncomfortable, that's how we create transformational change. But making people feel bad about themselves is makes that road much longer, much more challenging. So feel free others to weigh into that thing. But I think
Yeah.
asking for the feedback so that you can hear it is critically important.
Absolutely.
Find all the channels. There are so many channels to get at this information through skip level interviews and engagement surveys and anonymous Slack channels. And, there are ways to get at this information.
Okay.
And
Excellent.
then from another direction, I would say bring in people who are not normally in the board meetings into the room. That's one way that you can really foster some of that development. Executives, and then also have them own some of the key reporting that they might be doing, like portions that they would be leading, and just sharing that at the board level so that there's that exposure.
All good thoughts. I literally could speak to the three of you all day. That brings us to the top of the hour and our final 2021 session of Redesigning the Future of Work. I cannot believe we are here. So we'll be back in January. In the meantime, you can always catch up on past sessions on our site. And thank you, Fiona, Colleen, Felicia, such gratitude. Thank you for sharing your tremendous wisdom. And thank you everyone for taking the time. I wish you continued health. Hope that you very much carve out some time for self-care. And again, we are growing. If you are interested in learning more about roles that inspire or him for her, reach out to Fiona or myself. And again, have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a very enjoyable holiday season. Be well. Thanks so much.